want to make this be as interactive as possible. So I'll be monitoring the chat. You can drop stuff in the Q&A or the chat, whatever's better for you. And but feel free to share your thoughts and your questions. We are here for you, and we want to make this be as positive and as educational as an experience for everybody. With that, Mr. Baljeet, I can hand the microphone over to you. And
excellent. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Tim, and the rest of the ISACA San Diego leadership team for inviting us back. Just to recall, this is the second workshop in the series of workshop on API security and legal risk management. Today's workshop is focused on API security, and the title is the Security Blueprint from Basics to Advanced Defense.
Hey, can I interrupt you real quick for 1 second? I apologize. But Alex dropped another link for another upcoming event that totally slipped my mind. I guess my defenses. I was just thinking February, but there will be the event on March 1st, which is the San Diego Science and Technology Fair. The ISACA chapter does have a table at that. We'll be hanging out. You can check out the link there, but at the same time, it's great event for the family, all ages type of thing. So thanks for mentioning that, Alex. And Baljeet, I apologize. Back to you, sir.
No problem. Thank you, Dave. So I was just mentioning that this is the second workshop of our 4-workshop series. So this is the second of that. And today's focus is on API security. So we started with the general overview, and today we'll be taking a deeper dive inside API security topic, starting with some basic concepts as well as some more advanced concepts. To the benefit of our members who have joined the second workshop and missed the first one, a quick bio or the intro about myself. I'm the founder and CEO of TeejLab. Before starting TeejLab, I was the VP of Research at Black Duck Software. Black Duck Software was an open source risk management company. We built solutions for managing licensing and security risks. Before that, I was at SAP, once again, part of the team that did the due diligence across SAP products and services, while we help company manage open source risks and security risks. I have been with academia for a long time, and at TeejLab, my focus has been on API risk management. I'm very fortunate that I'm back with this community again, thanks to Dave and the rest of the colleagues to continue inviting us back, and especially creating this program focused on API security and risk management. This is the agenda of workshop 2, and once again, a reminder that if you missed the first workshop, and Dave, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, the recordings and the slide deck are available for the colleagues to get access to and watch the recordings. Although these workshops are related to each other, but they are independent in many ways, so that you can continue on from the workshops if you missed the previous ones. But for a more enhanced experience and training and skill development, you may want to attend all these workshops. Starting with the second, we'll go more into the security topic. As far as the agenda is concerned, I want to spend the first few minutes explaining the importance of APIs and motivating the audience why we should care about API security. Although I touched this topic in the first workshop, but today I will be going a little bit more deeper and providing you more examples on uh, uh, latest API data breaches and how these breaches took place, and what does it takes what does it take for us to secure these APIs, which is our part two of this workshop. I will also be identifying what a attack pattern looks like when APIs are under attack. What should we be monitoring? How do we even know we are under attack? Our APIs are being abused. So we will be looking into OWASP top 10 security recommendations coming from OWASP, and also sharing more thoughts on how we can constantly monitor the weaknesses so that we can address those API specific issues. Towards the later part, we will look into preventing these attacks, specifically looking at API gateway capabilities and what are the functions we need to make sure that APIs are secure and we constantly monitor them and continue to strengthen our security posture. Last but not the least, we will have some take-home exercises. And since this is a very hands-on practical workshop, throughout the workshop, I will be demonstrating and using examples. In this particular case, I'll be showing you some examples with respect to how we can configure authentication authorization tests on APIs, how can we check rate limits, and bunch of other tests that are generally accepted as industry best practices. So without further ado, let me start with the first topic, which is looking into the basics of API security, as well as looking into the recent security breaches from the API ecosystems. Let me start with very quickly refreshing your thoughts what we covered in the first workshop, just very one or two slides. In the first workshop, we had looked into the historical evolution of APIs, all the way from 1780s to 2000s, where APIs have become very important digital assets for enterprises. In many ways, they are quite essential for enterprises to offer their digital products and services. And today, it will not be exaggerated to say that APIs are very much like lifeline of any enterprise API digital ecosystem. And that's what makes APIs significantly at risk as well from a security postures point of view. And once again, to refresh your thoughts, I am talking about web APIs. APIs could be local APIs as a resource connecting your computing devices. So I'm not talking about APIs that are available as a call to various interfaces locally. I'm talking about APIs that are available over the internet as a service, or in other words, as a web service. So here is a typical depiction of you may have an app, and this app is connected to their app. So there could be your partner, your customer, or even third-party service provider. And APIs are the way you connect your app with their app. Most of the cases, using a REST API over the internet using HTTP protocol. So that's a standard. But previously, going back to the history, we had SOAP APIs and other variations in the underlying technology. But I'm talking about regardless of whether it's a REST API or other, any service that is available over the internet, giving you access to your resources, to others, or you are able to access resources in your ecosystem. This way, APIs are connecting our digital ecosystem. Either they are enterprise applications or social media channels, marketplaces, they are all connected through APIs. To refresh your thought again, this slide I used in my previous workshop, but there is a slight change. Let me see to engage with the audience. If somebody who attended the previous workshop and now they're attending this workshop, can you figure out there is a change in this particular slide? What is that? If you can put in the chat window, uh, thumbs up to you. If not, I'll just give a pause and answer the question. Or as a matter of fact, yes, KZ. So clap to for KZ. DeepSeek, absolutely. So I added this icon, and this is very much relevant to us in today's digital ecosystem because recently DeepSeek API was compromised, as if you're paying attention. And that is the precise point I wanted to make this through this slide. And not only that, open APIs were also compromised recently. So this grabs your attention very much. Thank you for answering the question. And that is indeed what I wanted to achieve. Now, going back to my original agenda, this is where we begin. Uh, I wanted to tell you what is the importance of APIs in today's digital ecosystem at a global scale. That is the question I want to answer in perhaps in a more analytical way. There are many ways we can quantify, but a intuitive way for me to quantify was through this slide. I don't know whether you know this or not, but a lot of times when I share this number with my colleagues and partners and customers and friends, they are surprised. If you look at the worldwide traffic, 83.7, I think this number is already old, uh, comes from APIs. That's how much data is being exchanged through web APIs over the internet. The rest of the traffic is, visiting HTTP pages or other mechanisms that we use internet for to exchange data or resources that generates this traffic. So that's one way to quantify. The other more important economical impact that web APIs are making can be measured or assessed through this slide. These are the GDP numbers for 2027 for the top three economies in the world. United States, China, Japan, and guess what? The total economy created by APIs, in terms of the data they transact, in terms of the dollar value they enable, in terms of the job creations they have, in terms of the entire digital ecosystem they connect. Guess what? They are the third largest economy in the world. I mean, that is philosophical, but you get my point, what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The numbers are in trillions of dollars. So that was another way for us to measure what economical impact APIs are making in our digital world. Yet another way to understand the importance of APIs is looking at across industries. Okay. And if you look at this various industries that I'm highlighting here, oil and gas industry, that contributes 8% of the GDP, employs 10.3 million people in the world. And their API ecosystem is massive. Why? Because all the data integrations for refineries, the equipment movement, the real-time monitoring of those operations, automation, exploration, production, and distribution of those supply chains. APIs are the lifeline of this industry. Look at the financial services. They contribute 6.4 million jobs in the market, with 7.4 contribution to the GDP. Look at the use cases that APIs enable. Data exchanges, all the financial transactions you can imagine, including the mobile deposits, payments, transactions. They're all underlying API infrastructures. And look at the fintech innovation that are happening. Look at the bank, not a traditional bank, but the lending banks for small and mid-sized businesses. They do not have shops. They're all on the internet. They're all on the web. You know, loans, mortgages, all kinds of services, all through these services, digital ecosystems, empowered by APIs. I can go on and on and on and explain you all that with various industry examples, but I think you get my point. Look at all these numbers, how many people they employ, and that's the impact APIs are making on not only just industries as a technology that empowers those products and services, the number of people that are employed that need to understand the API ecosystem from a security point of view. We cannot have any excuse not to understand API security. We cannot understand, or we do not make ourselves gullible to the hacks that are happening with API breaches. We cannot keep a close eyes to what's happening with risk from intellectual property that gets compromised by the use of APIs because underlying they're exposing data through the data models, which can be used for training and all that. And many of these APIs are AI-driven APIs. As I mentioned in my previous workshop, a lot of these APIs are AI-driven APIs, not only just providing raw data, but they're providing intelligence, as one of our friend correctly guessed DeepSeek connection in that picture that I showed. It's not just an API that is providing just a raw format of an answer. It is a very intelligent uh, answer to your questions that can be embedded in your customer applications, in your mortgage applications, in chats and bots. You can imagine various examples that are being empowered. Last but not the least, government sector. Employs 22 million throughout the US. By the way, these are all industries. I'm talking about the US numbers. 12% of the GDP. And, many of these government organizations have an open data policy. Uh, Various departments have exposed their data through these APIs to enable the innovations so that these data can fuel more growth, by creating new products and services and so on and so forth. So in summary, APIs are the growth engine in today's digital economy. And not paying attention to security is no longer an excuse that we should be having, and hence this workshop.
Hey,
So why?
I'm sorry, real quick. We do have a question. I just wanted to let you cover what you were covering on
Yeah,
that slide, which is an eye opener. Laura had asked, when referring to a software as lightweight, what does that mean?
good question, Laura. What does that mean is, if you look at API, it is the intelligence that you consume. For example, ChatGPT or DeepSeek API. So when you integrate that API in your software applications, you are perhaps writing, 10 lines of code. That's what it takes to call an API from a third party. So that's what I mean by lightweight. However, there is a catch there. For ChatGPT or DeepSeek to build that API, there is a massive uh, software engineering effort that happens in the backend. It's not just the API that is exposed, but there is a data, there is a training, there is a software, there is a hosting of that API in the cloud. So there is a much larger ecosystem that gets deployed from the provider's point of view. So it's not lightweight from their point of view, but lightweight from the consumer point of view. So in many ways, this could happen within an organization as well. Lightweight approach that I'm talking about. where one department could build APIs, for other departments where they are constantly consuming those for various, streamlining business processes and whatnot. But overall, low code, no code, or lightweight is what I meant by it is much easier for anybody to write a small piece of code, maybe just 2 or 3 lines of code, to make a call to an API, get the response, get the data that you need, embed in your business logic or in function, and there you go, using those APIs. So the lightweight part is from the consumer's point of view. Hopefully that answered your question, Laura, but let me know if you have any follow-up. Okay, good. So now let's go to answer this question. Why care about API security? This is another slide I shared last time where I talked about many API breaches that have taken place recently, all the way to social media platforms, to mobile companies or healthcare applications and whatnot. So we have seen some of these examples in my previous workshop. What I want to share with you today is a deeper insight about some of the breaches that took place very recently. When I say very recently, late 2024, early 2025. So let's look into this, some of these breaches that happened recently. Very recently, which grabbed the attention of the world, first by launching their AI technology, and then when their API got hacked within the launch a few months. I personally looked at their API, how it is actually how it can be used. By looking at their API, I was not surprised that there were certain aspects that could have been done in a better way. For example, not necessarily passing the API key along with the token in the header. That is obviously an approach we use for basic authentication, but perhaps a better approach would have been, just use the API key, perhaps in a query parameter rather than. I don't know if it makes more secure because you can still hash the browser to compromise the APIs, but nonetheless, somebody figured out a way to hack their APIs. And by getting access to their APIs, they were able to access to an account which had more privileges. They were able to collect some data and able to show the breach in their system. So this issue was promptly addressed by them, after Wiz and some of the other organizations found this data breach. And you can read more about this or this link here. But this was a case in which their publicly available data was compromised, uh, while giving access to chat histories, perhaps some user details, as well as exposing people's authentication keys, which they can further use to, compromise their APIs. Yet another example, this time from the US, from one of the government departments. So US Treasury Department's one of the APIs last year got compromised, which basically was through a third party. So API key from Beyond Trust remote support software, the hackers got access to some of the workstations, and due to that, they were able to basically breach some of the privileges data that they were not supposed to see. But nonetheless, CISA and FBI were on this immediately. They revoked the compromised API keys and shut down the affected services. Yet again, a reminder that anybody could be affected. The moment we become lazy in monitoring, managing our APIs, these are the assets like a door to your information systems. You leave your door open, anybody, can compromise the security. Kia Motors, a little bit more sensitive than the previous two breaches. The problem here was the hackers got access to uh, the vehicles that they had enabled their internet features. For example, starting their car for perhaps for warming them up, locations that these vehicles were at, and whatever the user wanted their vehicles to do. That was provided as a feature to them that they can control over the internet, typical IoT application. Nonetheless, the hackers got access to the web portal, Kia's web portal, and then they were able to get into various people's account by just figuring out the license plate numbers of those vehicle owners, and then getting into their accounts and finding out what features they had enabled and exploiting them to do things like remote tracking of their vehicles, unlocking car doors, even honking them, or even starting the ignition. That's very scary. So this is what happened with Kia's web portal that had some internal APIs empowering some of those features. Yet another example, but this time from telecom perspective. Here, the impact was not necessarily monetary, but more so from a privacy point of view. Millions of users' private information was compromised. This was not a direct impact on their finances, but who knows? All this data of millions of users make it ways to a dark web where this piece of information can be further utilized for launching attacks on those individuals for whatever reasons. So here, an API was exposing certain personal information, and by accessing certain accounts, they were able to get to an admin account, which allowed them to access 10 million customers and so their personal information. Once again, uh, an important breach. I think I have two more examples. Twitter, once again, I think this was a second breach that at least I'm aware of that has happened with Twitter that was through APIs. To the best of my knowledge, there was one hack happened a few years ago, once again compromising Twitter platform, leaking people's email addresses and phone numbers and whatnot. Once again, this piece of information, and many of these Twitter users are potentially, high net worth individuals or celebrities or professionals with profound impact on societies. They are now target to phishing attacks because of these personal informations that were made available through this leaking API. Uh, Sorry, this is the second last and then one last one. In this case, you had attackers gaining access to API keys to a fintech company, especially in the cryptocurrency space. The estimated loss because of this breach was estimated to be 25 million. I do not necessarily have all the details what exactly this loss was. Was this loss in terms of crypto credits or the currencies that they were being exchanged or some other form? But based on what I could understand or gather information from this particular portal, it was estimated to be more of a financial loss to the stakeholders. Last one again, and again, very important one. Another incident like Kia's incident, where this API breach happened, which was basically uh, accessing the Mercedes-Benz Group vehicles, where hackers were able to search some information on LinkedIn, then get some information about the users, then validating those addresses by calling an API, because this was a typical use case of where trial and error method actually worked out. So you tried few fake email IDs, the API responded back, this user does not exist. And if you keep repeating this, you hit the jackpot. And in this case, you were able to access certain accounts, which eventually the hackers were able to once again authenticate users' vehicles remotely in the US, Japan, and in Canada as well. So now you imagine this is all within the last few months or so. Now, I'm not even talking about last 5 years. I'm talking about perhaps last 5 months. Uh, and you can see this why with my motivation examples from various industries, with the example of how APIs are empowering digital ecosystems. And in this case, various industries, various applications, all the way from IoT devices to vehicles to social media platforms. So you must be wondering, and that brings us to our first question. And Tim, please go ahead with our first polling question. If you're paying attention, then you perhaps by now figured it out. There cannot be one single type of API attack. Okay, depending on the underlying infrastructure, depending on the type of the API, depending on, uh, excuse me, how the APIs are being enabled. API attacks cannot be of one single kind. Okay, there must be different kinds of API attacks. So, what is your answer? Do you believe there are various kinds of API attacks? And if you want to go one step further by answering what those API attacks could be, I think that'll be very nice. So, let me give you pause.
Yep, so we're up to about 38 hits out of a group of 60 plus.
Okay, great. So we have 42 responses out of 65. Do you want to give a few more seconds to
Sure.
the colleagues? Okay. All right. So I think we have um, good sample now. I think more than 50%, or rather actually 70%. And 96% of you believe that there are more than one type of API attacks. And all of you are right. So let's look into what are the different types of API attacks, and eventually we'll go to this topic that are listed on our agenda. So that brings us to understanding what are the types of attacks that are happening in this ecosystem with different types of APIs that we talked about and various mechanisms in which these are being attacked. So let's take a deeper look. Let me first present the overview. And if you look into this, then we can broadly classify these API attacks into 7 broad categories. API spoofing, injection attacks, in particularly when APIs are designed, many times they have inputs in terms of parameters. And by design, when you have input, those inputs can be abused or exploited to inject something that was not intended. So that in general is injection. At the same time, you can simply fuzz with those APIs. Instead of giving an expected query, you may just ask for a question that is not intended and see how API responds. So API fuzzing. API poisoning, yet again, very important problem. More so important from the AI perspective. And I will talk more about that, what exactly API poisoning mean and how in the artificial intelligence world, this is becoming a more so serious threat moving forward, which goes beyond a security threat, beyond a typical license issue or an intellectual property issue, and looking into some of those aspects. And also looking into denial of service attack through APIs, phishing attacks, and remote code execution problems, which can happen through APIs as well. But in summary, spoofing is when you are able to divert the users to a fake API where you can collect credentials that you can use to launch a bigger and better attack. Poisoning is yet completely different other problem where you can pollute your underlying API models or engineering components, including AI components, to make API respond in unintentional ways. So let's look into these problems in a more deeper way. So let me talk about the spoofing problem first. As I mentioned, spoofing is a particular type of attack in which you divert the intended API user to a fake API. Okay, so this could happen in multiple ways. So either you create a fake website where you have a URI that user clicks and it takes them to a malicious place where thinking that this was the intended API URI. But actually, this is where a user enters wrong credentials or correct credentials, but to a wrong input. And that's how their APIs get compromised. And once you steal the credentials, you can launch more sophisticated attacks or steal pieces of information to launch those attacks. Injection attack, as I said, are the ones in which you are able to exploit API inputs. In order for you to exploit API inputs, you have to keep in mind that the API design itself was compromised in the sense that when think of API as a box, just for the sake of argument. This box takes an input and gives an output back. So if the input that you're trying to put is hexagon, on the other hand, if it is supposed to take a circle, then it should not let that hexagon go into the circle shape that you have. So, so if this is what the intended usage is, or rather this was your intended usage is, and hacker is or intended or malicious actor is giving this input, then this should not accept it. So conceptually, the inputs should be sanitized before you go through the workflow of executing the API implementation in the backend. And this is the main reason why you are able to inject malicious codes. This could be just a simple command or SQL statement, or just a garbage through your parameters to the API server, which is executing the underlying code, and in the process executes those malicious pieces of code, which has unintended consequences. Now, remote code execution is another way where you exploit the inputs. But here, your idea is to inject something that can be executed as a code in the backend, right? So both ways you are injecting something. But here, the goal is you're injecting a piece of code that with the intention that the backend server will be able to execute, through which you will be able to exploit the targeted server. That brings us to this question now. If both are exploiting the API inputs, then what is the difference between API RCE problem and API injection problem? Some of you, I know you guys are quite an expert in the API space. So let's see if some of you can answer this question, or if you have a general answer, that's welcome as well. So the question is, what is the difference between an API remote code execution problem and API injection problem? Okay, so Tim, since this was not a binary answer,
Yeah, it's a short answer. It's up to 200 characters.
okay, so let's see if we have some answers. Okay. Okay.
And we do have some feedback in the chat as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So are you looking at the chat part or the Q&A part, Dave?
I am looking at the chat. Let me. Yes, under chat. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So we have some answers, and someone has responded that injection is due to input not being sanitized, and RC is due to not proper authentication. RC is an exploit of the system. Injection requires data input validation. Well done. So those are the correct answers, but many of you have said you don't know, but that's fine. I have a slide that explains this difference in a better way. So as two of the colleagues answered this question, RCE mainly exploits the fact that you do not have a secure way of deserializing uh, your inputs or your objects that ultimately API calls receives. And this is because of the code execution flaws that happen in the backend by which you gain access to the system. On the other hand, API injection is more about giving a malicious payload to the API inputs, which are the parameters, to manipulate and gain access in an unauthorized way. Uh, in many ways, the impact is a bit more serious with remote code execution in many ways, but this can be equally said for API injection problem as well, depending on how severe your API breach was, even with the API injection problems. If you do not have any sanitization at all in your API implementations, this could be pretty serious, as bad as remote code execution. But in general, we treat RCE to be more serious in many ways than simply the injection attacks. The reason is a lot of the automated frameworks, programming languages, syntactically provide some sanitization capabilities, which by now a lot of developers are aware of, at least on the main programming languages, which is easy to sometimes easy to ignore. But as long as a developer is aware of those features and functions, it is a easy implementation of sanitization mechanisms. Now let's talk about API fuzzing. I can give you a API which is well intended, well designed, but yet it doesn't stop a hacker from still giving wrong inputs. Right? So you go to a bank which transacts USD, but you keep asking for Canadian dollars. You're not going to get your money back because the bank only deals with the USD. So with this analogy, if your API is designed that I need a specific input, if you don't give me a specific input, I'm not gonna give you an answer. If that is the design principle in general, philosophically, then fuzzing doesn't affect you. But let's say if your use cases do not cover certain unknown inputs that you couldn't imagine, that some creative person might be able to inject, you're dealing with a situation which is typically called API fuzzing. So fuzzing is all about giving random wrong inputs to your APIs to see how your API behaves. And if your API doesn't behave well, that's a bad sign. And that's where APIs could spit back, which could be completely nonsense, or even worse, would spit back something that was very critical from a privacy point of view, from a security point of view, which could be either counterproductive, financially liable, or even in some cases operationally challenging. Phishing attack is once again attack in which your goal is deceive the user with fake APIs and make them provide credentials that you can use for more persistent attacks, advanced persistent attacks moving forward. Now, this is an interesting one, which is denial of service attack, but by using your one of the APIs, which had no mechanisms to access control the usage. Um, so basically, if you do not have mechanisms built in the system that allows you to limit how many calls must be served, either based on IP address, based on individual user account, or even geography, then what could happen is that the server may be responding too many API calls at the same time, bringing the entire server down in some cases. Now, this is easy to understand that calling an API multiple times, perhaps hundreds of times per second, to see whether API is able to handle those responses. If you do not have a throttling mechanism in place or other mechanisms in place to deal with such situations, then this very much API could compromise your service and bring your portal down, bring your services down, causing more pains later on. This was the last on my list that I wanted to explain. And as I mentioned, that why we care about APIs in the AI world now. And this is the reason, this attack in particular. So API poisoning is a mechanism in which you try to affect the basic functioning of the API, okay, rather than exploiting the output of the API in many ways by the previous API attacks that I talked about. Here, the intention is you're not interested in the immediate output of the API. That I give you this input through fuzzing or manipulation or by random inputs, and you get an answer and you use that information to launch further attack or to cause any other damages. Here, the intention is, can I change the basic nuts and bolts of that API? Let me give an example. Let's say there is an API which takes a query as an input from the user, goes back to the database, executes a query, and looks to some of the training data models that empower the answering of that question. The API poisoning case in this case is, can I actually execute something that can modify the basic workflow of that API, how it is computing the answer? And that is precisely what API poisoning is all about. Now you take that use case and apply this onto AI solutions. Let's say an API uses underlying data model which answers many questions that are given as an input through the API. Now, if by exploiting one of these APIs, you are able to change the mechanisms in which this API was responding while using the underlying data model, you could make this data model biased. You could corrupt this data model, which could be giving wrong answers. And the provider of the API would never know that, this is actually happening, because It is not violating any API rate limits. It is not violating any phishing, or it is not giving too many um, uh, inputs that are wrong that you can monitor through various mechanisms to suspect that this was intended malicious user. You do not actually have it's a silent killer, and that's the name that we're driving from poisoning. It's a slow. I think it could be slow poison. It could be a fast poison. Doesn't really matter. But the point is, it changes the function or corrupts the function of the API, which is more serious in the context of APIs that are using or leveraging upon the data models. So, in summary, all these attacks, all these different types of attacks could happen with APIs in general. Some are more serious, some are less serious, but nonetheless, they are all very important. Now, let's look into one more time few API attacks that we have seen that capture these different types of API attacks we just went through. And here, what I'm listing on this side is just to protect the privacy of organizations and their interest. I'm not highlighting their APIs and the endpoint details. I'm just saying API 1, API 2, API 3. But these are the real APIs that we investigated as a company. So my team and the colleagues, they helped us investigate some of these APIs in which we found these vulnerabilities. In some cases, APIs are including pieces of information, for example, server details, which anybody could look at and exploit those details if, let's say, one of the servers that we came to know is using a particular version of the software. So, and we happen to know that this is an open source, uh, and there is a publicly available vulnerability that this particular version of the software that is running on the server uh, is exploitable, I can very much bring the entire system down. So by looking at these examples, our intention was how bad the situation is. We just wanted to sample data. It is not possible for us to investigate every single API in the world, but we could take a sample. And that's exactly what we did. By looking at these problems that I talked about, see what the situation was with the sample we considered. 80% of those APIs fail these tests that we wanted to check. Little less than 20% actually pass some of these tests. And truth must be told, we did not run every single test that we can imagine. Even this 19% or so APIs may have some other vulnerabilities that we didn't have either means to check or we couldn't exploit based on the limited time and resources we had. But nonetheless, this is a story that I want to share. 80% of them had some problem, some small, some big, but 80% of them had some problem. My sample size was 150, looking at various APIs from various industries, some publicly available open source, some private, and some, just APIs that perhaps are developed by non-entities or just individuals for as a pet project. But this really gave us a good understanding what's happening in the ecosystem. So now, in summary, CISOs or security leaders are worrying about not only these attacks I'm talking about on their APIs, on their partner APIs, but they also have to worry about third-party APIs they're depending on. Many of these open source projects that they're using, many of them have some API integrations. I mean, that's the whole idea around, APIs. or open source. Open source basically, uh, in many ways, are being replaced by APIs because a lot of those functionalities, you don't need to embed a library. You can simply uh, embed a few lines of code and make it more live rather than just embedding an entire library. And looking at these problems that I just shared with you, on top of that, your API ecosystem may not only be just your APIs, but also third-party APIs, your partner APIs, your customers' APIs, your internal APIs from different departments make this ecosystem very complex. That brings us to the third question that we want to ask. Are you familiar with any API security frameworks that we could use that would help us address all these problems that we mentioned? Okay. Once again, you can answer this question uh, if on the Zoom polling question, but also let's say if you have more insight that you want to share a particular tool or a framework, you're welcome to do that through the chat window. So far, we have roughly 45% response, and based on that 45% response, 70% of people, they don't know which framework can be used. 35 or so, they have some idea or precise idea of which security framework they're using or they can use. So that's a good number. But majority actually does not necessarily know this. So Tim and Dave, I think we have scheduled breaks in between. So this is about an hour or so, which means we can take a break. But let me know while we are moving into break time, how was my speed? Should I be adjusting my speed? Am I going too slow, too fast? Or any other feedback that you guys might have?
Well, it certainly opened that up to, yeah, anybody to, well, there's some answers in the chat saying saying you're doing anything from good, great, excellent, and everybody's saying keep going in the way that you're doing it now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone,
Sure.
for the
We
feedback.
do have one question. I answered a couple of the Q&As directly, but Michael is asking, in general, how might an organization have data control over third-party services and the data used?
Data used by them or data used by you of your third parties?
How might an organization have data control over third? It doesn't really say if you can. Yeah,
Yeah, okay, sure. So I'll answer from both perspectives.
that'd be great.
So the first scenario is when you're using third-party APIs inside your products and services. Okay, so APIs provided by third parties, you are building your digital services in which you're consuming those third parties. If the question was, how do we control? Because you may have certain obligations. How do you use those APIs? If these are commercial APIs, perhaps you are limited by how many API calls you can make and whatnot, and which products and services where you can integrate with. So these are all compliance specific questions that you must address and make sure that you are meeting your SLA requirements and obeying the or honoring the contracts that you have in place for that. But it may go one step further. You may have certain third-party APIs that are exclusively built for you to consume. So those are the ones that you want to protect even more because they might ask you to sign a contract because this API is providing a special piece of information that your partner is not giving to anybody else. They did it because you are a special customer. They're giving you tons of money to do that, or X number of reasons. So your obligation to protect those APIs are no less than protecting your own APIs. Okay. So now the question is, how do we do this? Well, the very first thing is you use those APIs on need to know basis. Okay, so certain products, certain services, you have control. You're monitoring those APIs. Perhaps even better if you are using a gateway in which you are constantly recording the responses, so that if there is any dispute in the future, uh, you can actually go back and see what output you received from that particular API. Because if it is just a integration within your product where you use the API input, you make a decision and you move on without recording what actually the answer was given, you don't have a way to go back and see uh, and track from a compliance perspective, what answer was given. So you don't know. The vendor who provided the API to you may have those logs that they may have kept, but to be on safe side, you should have your own copy. So that's one way you can apply some GRC principles to make sure that you have some control over data that that you are consuming from third parties. Now let's talk about the other scenario, the flip side of things, where you are giving your APIs with your data to third parties to use. And if your question was, how do I control that? Well, it has to be embedded within the design, isn't it? Because APIs are nothing but a kind of a tool that operates on top of your information systems, structured, unstructured, connecting your legacy systems, connecting your modern databases, or even NoSQL databases and whatnot, whatever your underlying technology is that is exposing this data through the APIs. If your team, the engineering team, has done the right thing, not because they wanted to or they were aware of, but just whatever the practices they followed. If they are recording those API calls and recording the inputs, outputs to make sure that what's going out, and also if they have a way to access control those APIs, who's using which APIs at what time, is also another way you're controlling your data. In summary, by the way, I gave a very long answer to those two questions, but those were really important questions. And that is the entire data governance around APIs that pretty much every enterprise is struggling with. But there are good solutions, there are good practices that we can put in place, and without reinventing the wheel. So hopefully that answered that question. But I'll pause again to see, Dave, if there was a follow up. Who asked that question, Dave?
Michael, oh man, I'm going to butcher the last name, Nagtalon. But he did say thank you very much. That answers everything.
Okay, good. Thank you, Michael. All right, so I think it's 1 hour, approximately 10 minutes. Should we take a break?
I think so. I think we can take a few minutes, let everybody kind of clear their legs and everything like that.
Yeah. So when we come back, just a sneak peek, this is where we are right now. And now we're going to take a little bit longer break because we will help colleagues sign up with their accounts. Because the next phase of this workshop is quite technically heavy, which means I will be showing use cases, I'll be showing you demonstrations and configuring security test cases and whatnot. If folks have already signed up, you already have access to the TeejLab platform. Dave and Tim had already sent the invitations for you guys to sign up. If you have already done that, you're in a good shape. You don't need to do anything. Go take a break, grab your coffee or a bio break, and come back in 15 minutes from now. But people who still need help in signing up, stay with us, and we will help you get signed up to the platform.
Perfect. So we'll give everybody 15 minutes and hang out if anybody needs help.
Yeah, with the help, I'm estimating we should again start around 5:20-ish.
Okay. So we'll give everybody 10-ish minutes.
Yeah, or
Okay.
if a little bit longer, I have a room for 20 minutes or. But since we have a packed agenda, probably we don't want to waste any minute. Dave, how should they let you know that they need help? Are they putting their names in the chat, or they're asking question they need help with the account
Oh,
signups?
if anybody does need help, please just post it in the chat, and probably best to include your email address as well, so we can look it up through there. And because within the webinar's chat, it will show who the person's name is, and then we can reference against the email address as well. And we don't have any takers yet. Oh, right on, Michael. Glad I got your name right. Thank you, buddy. Cool. Okay, and I'll be right back myself as well. Oh,
Okay.
here is, I'm going to drop the link to there in there. And if you don't mind taking a look, Baljeet, there is one person in there, Karthik, that might be having trouble. I did drop the link to the TeejLab platform in there as well.
Okay, sure. Let's take a look.
And yeah, so there was a question in the Q&A where you do have the right URL in there. Okay, and I'll be back in just a moment.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Tim, would you like to send an invitation to Karthik, or you want me to take care of that?
Let's see. He just
He has
joined.
sent. He has put his email in
Yeah.
his chat window.
Let's see. I think just joined. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I already checked. He has not been invited yet.
Okay. Okay. Good enough.
So
Yeah.
this will be a new invitation.
Okay.
Tim, were you able to
Yeah.
send the
Yeah.
invite?
Yeah. I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
Okay, it went out. So Kartik, did you get it?
I see a new invitation going to
Yeah, he
do
got
the.
it.
Okay, cool. So Balaji is saying that it is asking for a password to log in. Yeah, so just use the password that you used to sign in. And if you forgot your password, you can reset it.
But Balaji, I think the issue is you have to, when you first sign in, you have to create an account. So that includes creating a password. Oh,
Looks like Balaji, you sent an invite to him already. I can see his email ID that he was invited. So Balaji, just follow the steps in the invitation you received and set up your account. Yeah, that's fine. You can use Google single sign-on as well. That's fine as well. Okay, so Balaji is saying if you can send him invitation again. So just refresh his invitation, Tim. Just hit the bell icon.
okay, one sec. Oh, not, oh no, wait a minute, I gotta get him. I was about to send it to Kartik. Balaji. And, okay, yeah, there he is. Okay, so,
Yeah, the domain name is solarturbines.com.
yeah,
Yeah, you can double check with Balaji if that's his email ID.
yeah, I got him.
Mhm.
So, is there a way to, actually way to refresh it? I mean, or send him a new, oh,
Yeah,
because
just hit the
this,
bell icon.
oh, of course, okay. Oh, right,
Yeah.
yes, okay, yep.
Yeah, I can see that you have sent him invitation again. So Balaji, please check your email again. You should receive a TeejLab email, but with the reference to Tim's invitation.
Okay, Fitzgerald. Okay.
Okay, looks like Balaji has signed in already, so I can see he has access now.
Oh, give me a reason. Fitzgerald. Hmm. Fitzgerald. Yeah, I did resend. I did resend to Fitzgerald.
Okay, that's cool.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Looks like Ibrahim has a question. He has raised hand. So how do we allow? Is he going to type in or?
Oh, hang on. Ibrahim. Ibrahim, if you like, I can allow you to talk. Let's see where that takes us. Ibrahim, you can. What do we got here? Okay, so Ibrahim, if you unmute yourself, you can speak to ask what you had. And we'll give you another minute there.
You might be on mute, Ibrahim.
Yeah, you look like you're on mute on your end. Maybe he stepped away.
Okay, so I guess we can get started.
I think
Glad that everybody was able to sign in, so there's no pending request. All right, so in this part, I want to talk about uh, the OWASP top 10 recommendations for API security. This is the answer I was expecting when I asked this question. Are you familiar with any API security frameworks? And this is a top 10 guidance that you can have, which is as follows. The top 10 OWASP recommendations, as the name suggests, are the top 10 recommendations among others that have been evaluated, which emphasizes on, if I can highlight one or two things, more on authentication and authorization problems. So the top one problem that they have identified that we should pay attention to is a broken object level authorization, or sometimes for a short, we call this BOLA. Okay. The issues, as I will explain more in this situation, is you are authenticated user, but you have privileges that are not conducive to the role that is given to you, or the logic that is implemented to give you access to certain resources is not to the expectation. Broken authentication, on the other hand, is when you have access to the resource where you should not be accessing the resource at all because you haven't even authenticated who you are. So this way, these are the top two problems, but within a broken authorization problems, there are several types of broken authorization problems. One at the function level, one at the property level, so on and so forth. So let's look into them in more details. So broken object level authorization problem is when a hacker is able to exploit parameters uh, and replace certain artifacts in the inputs to get more privileges that you were not entitled to. For example, if by looking at this URL, if you pay attention, then I might have access to this particular resource, but by simply changing shop 1 to shop 2, or this could be department 1, and then simply changing the URL, I have access to department 2 resources. Okay, so I am a authenticated user, but by cleverly manipulating the URL, I'm able to get resources that I'm not entitled to access. So my authorization layer is broken. Okay, so in the ideal world, the authorization layer should have been able to detect me as a user that I have access to this particular resource, but not necessarily to this resource. Okay, once it is broken, then that's referred to as BOLA, or broken object level authorization. Broken authentication, on the other hand, is a situation in which you have access to API without even authenticating you who you are. It could happen for two reasons. The number one reason could be that your authentication layer itself is broken. There is no authentication at all, the second case, in which case you were not even required to provide any credentials to access the resources. But broken authentication could also have certain other types problems. For example, you provided API keys as a way to authenticate. Somebody stole the key, and your key is being abused by the user. The other could be you you use a key that was very weak to begin with, that anybody could guess. That is a design problem when APIs are being designed with a specific authentication framework in mind. Authentication could happen in multiple ways, API keys, basic auth, OAuth, token based, and so and so forth, JWT, and so on and so forth. So either you are not building any mechanisms to credential to log in into the system, or your credentials are very weak, or you're not providing any credential mechanisms at all to access the APIs. So these are cases for broken authentication. Broken object level authorization is a problem when your access to a specific API is compromised as attackers call the API directly and retrieve sensitive information that they will use to filter out and launch a more persistent attack. So the API works with the data structure without proper filtering. You receive payloads that are blindly transformed into an object and stored. So all the objects, it might be a JSON object that is being returned. You are not entitled to see that. You are blurping all the items in that object, regardless of who was supposed to see the answers. So by using these broken authorization mechanisms, attackers can guess the fields by looking at the GET request and perhaps call other API endpoints and launch a more sophisticated attack. Unrestricted resource consumption is a situation in which attackers overload the API by sending more requests than they can handle. Okay, so simply attackers send or overload the API server by sending more requests, and the size of the API requests at some point exceeds what the API response can process, and by excessively payloads, API can hit the bottleneck and drop those requests. So this is not necessarily the rate limit problem where API is not tracking the rate limit at all. This is yet different issue in which you are giving somebody resources that are essentially not restricted in a proper way. Yet another authorization problem is when your functions are broken. So for example, you gave access to a user privilege through this API endpoint, and by simply replacing the user with my info to admin info, I'm able to get a more privileged account. Now I have access to the admin privileges by simply replacing the URL again. So this one is basically entitled to access admin resources. For example, this one is designed for a normal user. And because the authorization layer was broken to distinguish between those two resources, a user cleverly manipulates these different URIs to access resources that basically breaks your authorization layer. Now, you must be wondering, what exactly is the problem? Is the problem the API implementation, or the problem is the business logic that is supposed to give access to various resources depending on the role of people? Well, the answer is it's both ways. So oftentimes these roles or access to specific resources are in many ways are business logic that you write in your application. Of course, there are frameworks, there are libraries that allow certain default privileges, and you can choose those and embed that in your solution as part of the functionality provided by the library or the package. But sometimes these are not enough because of your complex business operations. You end up writing your own logics. And that's where these problems appear, where your logic is broken. And because of the broken logic, the unintended users get access to resources. And if one of those users are bad actors, then probably you're looking at much larger damage that they can cause simply because now they have more privileges. They can see more data, more sources, and perhaps launch more sophisticated attacks with that piece of information. Now, this problem, which is a newer addition in 2023 version of top 10. So they started in 2019 and 2023 they gave another top 10 recommendations which listed this is about unrestricted access to business workflow. So an attacker discovers an API to buy a product online and then uses some sort of automation to bulk purchase all items of a newly released product, which they later resell. Okay. So once again, here, your business logic is broken. If the user was supposed to not buy 10 products, but they buy it and they resell it, this is a business logic that had a flaw. There are various cases in which such business logics could cause much financial losses. This is yet different than authorization problem. This is more about your policies that you're implementing through those APIs that are broken as a business logic. Now, this is again a well-known problem that we have seen in non-API use cases as well, where an API accepts a URL as a parameter for a redirection, and then attacker finds that they can use this to redirect the responses to a rogue website. So basically, by modifying these requests, you are able to redirect the users to resources where they can steal the information to cause more damage. That's basically, uh, you know, forms the basis for injection attacks in, JWTs or any other token mechanisms. You may also have security misconfigurations. Oftentimes, you have default settings in your cloud DevOps environment, which are hosting your APIs, and you may have unpatched systems, unprotected files or directories, unhardened images, missing outdated or misconfigured TLS layer credentials, exposed storage or server management panels, missing uh, course policy, which basically restricts you. Website should allow you to access those resources or not, or redirecting those resources to others if and when they receive those requests. You might be including messages in API responses that could reveal information that was not supposed to be revealed, causing damage in multiple ways. Or in some cases, you may enable features that are unnecessarily, uh, from an application functionalities point of view. This is a problem which is also added during 2023 edition of API Top 10. And this problem is mainly about managing your inventory, basically API discovery problem. A lot of times, developers end up using open source libraries, not necessarily knowing certain APIs might already be embedded in those libraries. That makes a way in your enterprise applications, intentionally, unintentionally. And because of this, you have various issues. Um, Many times you do not even know that these versions exist. And by not maintaining them properly, you're exposing yourself to various security and compliance issues. And at some point in time, if these are single sign-on APIs that were required for you to sign in, get access to certain resources, because you had just embedded these libraries for a specific reason, these tokens or authentication information may stay there for longer periods of time. And then it's very difficult to detect because you you have not set time limits or expirations on these tokens. And this way you are basically are not even aware that these APIs exist that are making calls to certain resources. This is another use case, to the best of my knowledge, has been added again in 2023 edition, which talks about unsafe consumption of APIs. And the idea here is that your upstream API may store unintentionally any pieces of information that is provided by your customers, violating a data governance regulation from a consumer point of view, exposing their information uh, to to your customers and partners, which you were not supposed to reveal. So this problem is very similar to what I was explaining when somebody had asked the question about data governance in the context of API usage from third parties. So here, you're use, you're consuming certain APIs in an unsafe way. Either you uh, took the PII data, let's say, for example, that was provided by third party, and in your upstream usage, you simply plugged in those numbers and exposed those pieces of information uh, to your ecosystem. Now, if you look at some of the uh, frameworks, legal frameworks around the world, then regardless of who actually provided this personal information, uh, or rather, I should say, whoever is the owner or originator of this personal pieces of information, even if you are providing this information that you did not curate it or you did not own it, you are equally responsible uh, for applying a set of principles that will protect the privacy of individuals. So you cannot simply say that, oh, this is information I'm just receiving from third party and I'm just tagging along or shipping along the software supply chain that you are connected with. So in many cases, you end up using some of these APIs in an unsafe manner, which causes regulations or other legal problems. That brings us to the fourth question of the session, which is about all these problems we talked about, security misconfiguration, server-side request forgery, or unrestricted access to business flow, or even broken authorization or authentication mechanisms. How do we know that we have a problem? So how do we find out? Uh, more worse, what if we were under attack? How would I know that I'm under attack when it comes to my API ecosystem? So you can answer this question again. This is non-binary question. And you can type in your answer in the chat window. But I think you got the point. So this is about what are the indicators that reveals your APIs are compromised. So it looks like we have only 15 responses, partly because this is non-binary question. So people are thinking, what should they answer? So you can answer this in a binary way as well, where if you don't know any tool or process or any mechanisms that you have used that could indicate these compromise situations, you can simply say no. Or if you know a specific methodology or indicators that can be used to detect that APIs are under attack, you can mention that in the chat window as well.
Hey, Balsheet, there's some that are in the, hang on. Some of the other feedback I just pasted into the chat that it was showing as well to give you some more info. What we got
Okay.
here?
Okay, so I think we have good number of responses, and we can proceed further to find out what are some of the common indicators of compromise, or how do we know that we are under attack. So this brings us to this part. I think we'll go back and do some hands-on exercises on API security tests. But let me first show you the attacks so that we are in a position to prevent those attacks, to prevent those attacks. So this is a list of top 10 API indicators of compromise, so or IOC in short, or IC in short, which can be used as a indicator, as the name suggests, where we know that we are under attack. So the very first one is if you are seeing unusual or suspicious API calls, this could very much be uh, a problem that indicates that your APIs are under attack. Similarly, if you're seeing too many failed authentication and authorization calls, that is also a good indicator that your APIs are under attack. So this way, we have 10 different indicators that APIs are under attack. So let's look into them one by one. So unusual and suspicious API calls, as I mentioned, are the situations in which your API endpoints have unusual accesses. And they are dealing with sensitive data, such as administrative or other business functionalities related data. And you are also seeing methods that are not necessarily designed to basically call those API endpoints. So for example, if one API was designed as a GET call, and somebody is trying to exploit that API with a verb put, basically trying to see if you can execute a put call or a delete call to one of those, then you know that somebody is trying to play or fuzz with the API to see whether it is exposing any vulnerability. If other situations could arise when somebody is trying to request a single endpoint in a repeated manner, excessively. And if this is something, let's say, related to your authorization code generation. For example, in OAuth implementation, you are generating some tokens that the token is given by the service to authenticate the user, and then you get the code to further call the resource. So basically, a multi-layer system to access certain resources. And if the very first API that is supposed to give the token that you take it with your service request can also be compromised. So if somebody is making call to this token generation API too many times, that could be an indicator that that needs to be paid attention to. Similarly, if you have failed authentication and authorization calls, and that too from a particular individual or a particular IP, this could be also a indicator that somebody is trying a brute force approach to compromise the API. Or if somebody is trying to use fake API keys or stolen API keys over and over again, then that could also be an indicator. If somebody is trying to refresh the API token, so there are various mechanisms to authenticate, as I mentioned. If one of the methods that you had used to authenticate is through token based, and somebody is frequently trying to refresh that, it could be an indicator that somebody is trying to access resources in a malicious way, or worse, when they're trying to access the resource that they do not necessarily have a privilege to access. So in many situations, you may have failed authentication calls, but then you may also see a pattern in using tokens or keys in which you can guess, if not in a concrete manner, that the abuse might be in place, or worse, somebody is trying to get access to resources with a malicious intent. This is a problem that has grown exponentially in the last 5 years or so. But let me explain what this problem is about, first of all. If a user is authenticated and accesses certain resources, can we take it for granted that user is not malicious, because the normal pattern may look like this user is using this API in a compliant manner, but could there be anomalous behavior, which means that this particular user accesses this particular API, gets this a particular form or shape of data, then goes to another API endpoint, calls that API. So there is a systematic pattern or a systematic user behavior in this context. Now, this goes beyond a regular security problem, because how do you know what they're trying to do by this pattern? Because you have given them access to your APIs, and they are trying to use those APIs in a systematic way. But what does that tell? By monitoring such behavior, you can actually see if there are certain things that are abnormal. For example, if a user uses a API call on a specific during a specific time period, and suddenly you see a spike at a different time zone, perhaps in a different region, if you're tracking the IP addresses, then you have a reason to believe, could this be a stolen API key or credential or other ways by which you can validate that the user behavior is consistent, or it's not, either because the user's credential was compromised or user themselves are traveling or moving somewhere else. So by looking at these kind of patterns in terms of time and space, so when I say time, of course, the days, weeks, months, hours, and also the space means location, but also in the context of the diversity of data requests that are being made. So if that also looks abnormal, then you have a reason to suspect. If you suddenly see increase in traffic pattern or the increase in the volume of the data, that is also a sign of compromised API. So by looking at these patterns, you might be able to detect certain unusual uh, behavior of the system to mitigate certain problems or problems that are not yet surface, but gives you reason to believe that this could be a malicious attack. The other strong indicator in this case is the use of deprecated or outdated API versions. So oftentimes we build certain products, but then we sunset them and we build new ones. APIs are no different than that approach. So you built a certain API for a specific reason, but now you need to support a new functionality or a new use case. Then you build another one of the same capability or a different version, and then you forget about these deprecated APIs or the APIs that we're not supposed to use because simply they're outdated. But now suddenly you see some usage patterns in those deprecated or outdated APIs. That could be an indicator that somebody's sniffing around and looking into quick gain. If your API rate limits are being violated, that is a good reason to believe that somebody is trying to purposely access the APIs, but they hit the rate limit and then they stop, but then again start hitting the rate limits without knowing the consequences. So frequent rate limits may be um, annoying in some cases because you have to scale your solution for your customers and partners, and you may have a tiered approach where you may have 1 million and above calls under this tier, you pay this much. So you could have a very well structured pricing plan to serve the various needs of your customers. And if there are too many violations in those payment plans that you have offered in a particular category, that's another strong indicator that something is happening in this area, or this is something which you should look into from a risk management perspective. Some of these information may be already logged inside your logging systems, but you might have to write special logics to actually sorry, I looks like I forgot to change this title. I was still explaining. I forgot to change this title. I'm still talking about the rate limits. So maybe I can quickly do that.
And Baljeet, while you're doing that, and I apologize, I had to grab that call, but there was a question in the chat from Stuart. I don't know if that got presented yet to you.
No, actually. So where and how are these calls to the APIs tracked and reported? So where and how these API calls to the APIs tracked and reported? Well, you need to have some solution in place to actually track and store these API calls. You may be making calls. So this could be northbound traffic or southbound traffic, or both ways. So you basically are making calls to APIs that are outside in your applications. So you need different mechanisms to store those. But if you're providing your APIs, and I'm sure you probably are putting a gateway in place, not only to access control the users, but also to enforce the rate limits on those APIs. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, because um, so it depends on whether you are consuming those APIs or you are letting your APIs consumed by others. So you need different mechanisms to track the usage and reporting.
And Howard had posted log to SIEM. Would a SIEM be able to capture and track that stuff?
Okay, so let me see. Log to SIEM. What is that actually?
I believe he's saying, and I'm just interpreting it, that that what the APIs are doing are creating logs, and that those logs could be fed into a SIEM or some sort of application or device that would a SIEM would collect logs from multiple endpoints or devices, and
Got
then
it.
be able to correlate, track what's normal, what's abnormal, and possibly correlate between different activities to see if it's showing more of a trend in one way or another.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I'm not a end user of Splunk, but I know Splunk has very scalable capabilities of logging such activities. So yes, if doesn't really matter which tool it is, as long as your API calls go through a system that has captured some details around this call, then that's exactly what I'm talking about. Uh, and I think Stuart also clarified that he was talking about their APIs being consumed by others. So, for example, the comment made is that letting my APIs being consumed by others was my question above. So absolutely. So I'm sure when you are putting your APIs there, you have some mechanisms to, I hope so, that you are authenticating your users. Once those users are authenticated, then every time they are making calls to your APIs, you should have some mechanism in place to log them. So various tools provide this kind of functionality. That's exactly what one of the capabilities of API gateways is. So you can very much record those API calls. I would go even one step further by saying that not only recording that this API call is made at this time by this user, I would say even what were the inputs, what were the outputs, should also be recorded. Or at least you should have the capability, because if this is not your API and you do not know, you don't have control over the outputs, and let's say for one reason or the other, if API responses change or evolve over a period of time that cause some compliance issues, let's say the quality change. Let's talk about I think it's deviating from this particular topic that is on my slide, but I think that's an important question what Stuart asked. If it is a API that is making AI-driven decisions, now you can anticipate as data models evolve, the answers could change. There's no guarantee. It's not like a rain that is precisely recorded and you got the data, right? So if these are intelligent answers, either structured way, unstructured way, in terms of text information or image or audio, you could have business implications. What was the output for that data? So now, how do we record is a completely different technological challenge. But philosophically, that's what the recording would mean. Not just record the timestamp when this API was called, but what exactly was asked and what exactly was answered through this API is also important. So coming back to this slide, cross-site scripting or injecting attacks. So this is a typical way a hacker could redirect by manipulating the response of one of your APIs. So let's say one of your customers made an API call, and in a man-in-the-middle type of attack, the response was modified. Let's say the response was a JSON object, and in one of the JSON object, you were reporting back a URL. And let's say you modified that URL, and your customer received that URL and basically used that, which was the original URL got replaced by a malicious URL that the customer utilized in their business logic or in the function. That could very much call a huge risk. So in many ways, your messages indicating could indicate such problems, but your essentially API inputs are compromised, containing special characters, SQL queries, shell commands, or tags, which may indicate an attempt to inject code was attempted. Okay, this is another problem that could indicate that you are under attack, in which you have seeing misuse of API tokens. Now, this is a difficult problem because either you have applied authentication based on API tokens or IP addresses, or in some cases, both. The best would be if your tokens or scopes are also tied to certain other dimensions. For example, if I'm seeing a pattern that this particular user which is attached based on the API key, the calls were previously made from this IP address. Now, suddenly, I'm seeing that this token is being used from a service that is being invoked by this IP address, which is completely different than the previous IP addresses or the geographical location. That could be an indicator that maybe this API key is stolen, which is leading to this risk.
Balji, we do have a couple other questions, if I'm not interrupting.
Yeah, sure. Let's take those questions.
Okay, in the chat, Jose Luis Ibarra asked, are useful identity management platforms in addition calls to the APIs?
Are identity management platforms in addition calls to the APIs? Did you understand the question, Dave?
I not completely, no. I do understand the next question better. So Jose Luis, if you can elaborate on that at all in the chat, that'd be very helpful. I'm trying to answer your question as best as possible. The other question was in the Q&A from Michael. I'm a little bit of a beginner to APIs. Can API research and learning be done on a virtual machine? Do you have a recommended project or setup? Is the TeejLab platform one of those recommendations?
Is that question for me or for you, Dave?
I thought it was for you.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely. So you can very much use a TeejLab platform for this learning around APIs, discovery problems, security issues, and all the stuff that we are going through right now. Absolutely, you can. I'm not sure virtual machine. Yeah, I think I got the question regarding what was the virtual machine context. For just learning the basics around APIs to make a call to see what response comes back, looking at the parameters and all that, you actually don't need uh, to worry about the virtual machine. But yes, if you are using a virtual machine to access our platform to run some security tests, then those security tests are initiated by our backend server, not necessarily your virtual machine. Your virtual machine will simply receive the results of those API security tests, which will be launched by TeejLab platform. So the answer is yes again in that context, that if you're running some API security tests, for basic learning purposes, then yes, you can do that from your virtual machine as well, and that does not pose any problems to your virtual machine.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, or if I paraphrase, that it doesn't need to be a virtual machine or it can be your main machine, because when we access the TeejLab platform, the processing and what posts back is all being processed on the TeejLab platform.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
guys, I think I understand the question from Mr. Ibarra. What he's saying is, can you use identity management platforms as part of your, in addition to, you know, to check your calls to APIs? In other words, probably what he means is in addition to logging or what have you. So can they
Got it.
be a front end? Can a identity management platform be a front end to the API, perhaps?
Got it. Um, I actually don't know the answer whether IAM systems, identity and access management systems, can operate as a API gateway as well. See, essentially, for you to record API calls, you need API gateway capability, which means the traffic goes through the API gateway, either inbound or outbound, and you have a mechanisms to control that. From a service point of view, from a user management point of view, all those are the capabilities of a gateway. Now, can identity access management sit on top of these gateways, or they work in parallel with gateways to do that? I don't know the answer. Uh, Maybe some identity access managements work in conjunction with API gateways. I think identity and access management is the basis for all enterprise systems. So I would say my guess would be yes. A lot of IMA support operating in harmony with API gateways which allow you to do the logging, recording, access control, and all that. But those are two separate systems that basically are for other purposes. Uh, I'm not sure. Tim, do you want to add something based on? Looks like you understood that question well. Do you
I
want to add
understood it
anything?
from I understood it from a linguistic standpoint. I figured he was trying to show a comparison, right? He's saying, in other words, could they be used? Would they provide the information that would help you uh, in regard to API security? I think you answered it pretty well in, that you're saying you use the gateway really to record the parameters of the various API calls, and perhaps, oh, you got two hand raised, Dave. Anyway, that the identity management system would rather be used maybe as a follow-on, but that was the best I can think.
Well, I think an identity management is going to help identify the user or the individual. The that piece of information. But I don't know. I mean, and that could potentially show who entered the system to then access an API. But I don't
Correct.
think we're necessarily accessing the API from based on who the individual or those individualistic credentials would be.
Yeah, yeah. I think we are all on the same page. So let me put another perspective on this. So, do API gateways need identity and access management? Answer is yes. Because without authenticating, how you would allow a user to go through the gateway to access an API? Now, can identity and access management also be a gateway? The answer is maybe not, or maybe yes. We don't know, right? So identity and access management may not necessarily be API gateways as well, but the other way around is true in most of the practical situations I can manage. So um, some of the API gateways may provide that identity access management layer on top of them. But again, I don't know. I'm not aware of all the solutions that are available in the market uh, that can enable that. But I think we can move along, and we basically were going through how do we identify uh, various indicators that indicate that we are under attack. Okay, so in order for you to prevent API attacks, you need to first recognize what does attack look like, right? So we went through all these different attacks, whether somebody is trying to call your APIs multiple times, somebody is violating your API limit, somebody is using older version of APIs, that's also an indicator. Somebody is crossing the traffic and the volume of that the APIs were supposed to provide, or somebody is using APIs in a very sneaky way, systematically way, abusing or exploiting your APIs, which may be leading to the IP related issues as well. For example, this case of DeepSeek and OpenAPI problems. I think we were on the last part here where API requests to known malicious IPs. So let's say you are seeing that your API calls are being directed to malicious IP addresses, uh, and you are seeing that malicious payloads uh, are being injected, which is a scenario in which attackers may be trying to send a command to compromise the system through these API requests. So by collecting all those evidences, you are able to build a robust mechanism in which you can first detect, yes, there is some sort of attack going on, and then you can try to prevent those attacks or bring into your strategy, or at least these are the different ways you can imagine and build various policies and see what tooling support you need to implement those policies. That brings us to the topic of role of API gateway. But I want to go back to this particular topic because we actually didn't get a break in between after the first break. We can take a break, and then when we come back, I want to show you what are the different ways we can configure these authentication and authorization tests. How do you even check the authentication and authorization test? How does it look like? How can we run a, let's say, rate limit test to see whether API passes or fails that test? And we can look at how the results may look like and use these pieces of information to bring policies, and also learn more about what goes wrong in our configurations, and learn from those errors, and further strengthen the security posture. So shall we take a break right now, or we should continue until 6:30 and then take a break? It's what would be your recommendation, Dave, Tim?
I'd say carry on for a little bit, but that's, your all's choice.
Yeah, well, it's been about an hour since the last break, so if we want to go a little bit further, we can.
Okay.
It-
So how about we?
depending
Sorry,
on,
Dave, go ahead.
I was just going to say, kind of dependent on how comfortable you are as well, because you're doing so much of the presenting.
I'm fine. I would actually prefer that. Let's finish these two use cases, and then we take a break so that during the break, if somebody doesn't feel like taking a break, they can practice what we have done. And that would give them a little bit more time to catch up on the content and do so.
Sounds
So
good.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some security test cases and show you how to do this, and go from there, and then we'll take a break. So let's spend another 15-20 minutes. So
Perfect.
I'm going to stop sharing my slides and I will switch to my browser. Okay, so I'm going to share now. Okay, so this is the portal that everybody signed up today or before this workshop. Uh, so you can log in, or you can just watch me for the time being as I demonstrate some security test scenarios, and then we can see the next steps. So what I'm going to do is I have already uploaded an API that I'm interested in testing. Okay, so what test I want to do? Recall my previous slides. I want to do OWASP top 10 tests. I want to check authentication. I want to check rate limits, or whatever the test cases I want to perform, depending on the the functionality of those APIs that I have, or also sometimes depending on what that API does. If it is very sensitive to certain pieces of information, and we want that API doesn't leak some pieces of information. So how do we perform these tasks in a structured way and perhaps in an automated way. So that would be my scenario. The API that I'm going to use is just a test API, which is actually built for API testing only purposes. So I'm just saying ISACA test API, and this is the API endpoint. Okay, so first let me show you the normal behavior of this API. So how do I make call to this API is, this is already configured. So as you know, API has an endpoint. It is a get call. This has a required parameter, which is called page, has no optional parameters, and that's it. So basically, I'm making a get call to this particular API. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that or showing that how I configure this API. That's a separate question. Maybe if somebody needs help, I can demonstrate that as well. But many of you perhaps have a software engineering background. Maybe you have written a small Python code. You know how to make a get call, post call. You can use other open source tools, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really matter. So first, let me show you what this API does. So when I call this API, what it does. So what it does is it gives some information about users. So I try to make this call. Okay, so I need to provide the input because this is my required parameter. So the system is telling me this value is required. So what this API does is it takes a number, as the name suggests, page, the parameter suggests, and it gives a response back. So let's say I put 1, execute. So it gives back a response. So I can see the response. And this gives bunch of email addresses or user information. So that's what it does. Now, what happens if instead of 1 or numbers, I give um, a uh, a string input. So first, let me change this. This is already set up to string, but let me change this to integer value. So I update. So I pass this time to. So still gave me the information and gave me the response. Okay, so now I set this as a parameter type is integer. But now what happens if I give this API a string input? So let me make a call. Okay, so I gave, let's say, input some garbage. Okay, so obviously, if API is designed in a smart way, it should recognize this as a garbage and perhaps stop me from responding, or should take some action, because this doesn't look like a normal input. So here I did. So you can see that my input was garbage, but still it is giving me some answer. So it looks like not a good idea, right? So there is no input validation. Now what happens if I know that this is taking a number, so that is fine, but what if I give a very large number? Will it break their system? Because if they are taking this input and trying to compare two numbers or do whatever operation they are trying to do, depending on how the API design is there, we would know, how this reacts. So I ran that again with large number. So it gives me, I don't know. So it did not give me a response. It gave me something which indicates that the API was not happy, or text is tired, or writing endless social media comments, or I don't know what this is supposed to return. So the point I'm trying to make is these are the various ways we can input. So what I basically did is fuzzing. So I could check the authentication, I can check the authorization, and bunch of other tests that I did. Now imagine doing these test cases manually for each of those APIs. I mean, you can do this manually 1 time, 2 times, 10 times with 5 APIs, 10 APIs, but certainly this is not scalable, right? This is not scalable if you have hundreds of endpoints and you want to run hundreds of test cases in this situation, right? So that's not scalable. So the another aspect of security I want to do this is in a more intelligent and automated way. And that's where I will run some security test case using my security module. So what I'm going to do is, now many of you may actually not see this option. The reason is this is by design that we or the ISACA chapter leaders, they decided not to give access to security module to every signed in users for two reasons. We want people who are interested in testing, they can request the chapter leaders, Dave and Tim, for privileges to bump you up to get access to the security module. The reason why we wanted to restrict access was because we do not want accidentally somebody running injection attack with against some APIs that will jeopardize the system integrity. So please reach out to Tim or Dave if you want to uh, uh, get access to the security module. But for the time being, you can just watch me what I'm doing, and then we will take some questions. And later you can reach out to Dave or Tim for getting access to the security feature that I'm running. Now, what I'm showing in front of you right now is
just real quick, Baljeet. I went ahead and if anybody is interested in that, I dropped our email address in the chat, and just ping us and we can follow up with you after outside of this to help get you upgraded. There was one other question, if I can interrupt you, Baljeet, from Ibrahim saying, do we still have access to API University?
I think that's a question for you guys, because API University is another portal that also has some training material, if I'm not wrong.
If it is something separate, there isn't any. Let me answer that two ways. If we're referring to API University as a separate standalone platform, the chapter doesn't have any relationship with that platform, similar to anything like what we've got with you, Baljeet. But a little bit earlier up in the chat, Michael had shared the link to all of the TeejLab learning platforms and everything, which is a phenomenal resource. So if you are thinking of something different, Ibrahim, please just use the same email address and you can shoot us a note and we'll work to help you out as best as possible.
Yeah. And towards the later part of the workshop, I will share all these links, resources, the learning portal that we have in which you can watch some videos for training and also read some documents for further enhancement of your understanding. But let's continue. So the very first thing I want to grab your attention your attention is these security tests that I was explaining. So this is authentication authorization test. Then we also have the authentication tests. Then we also have buffer overflow tests, cross-site scripting tests, and insecure deserialization tests. So basically, whatever the OWASP top 10 cases are until 2019 are there for us to play and learn. Other than that, we also have a bunch of other tests. For example, this one test checks the absence of anti-CSRF tokens. This one see whether any error disclosure is happening in the API responses. So we will look into some of these test cases one by one. The very first test I want to do is this injection test I was trying to do. But the difference here is I don't want to do this manually. I want to do this in an automated way. Because if you run 100 cases manually, I mean, that's all you will be doing all day. You will not be writing or developing APIs. You might be just running the test cases. So once they're designed, my goal is I want to check, whether this API has any weaknesses in terms of this coverage I just shared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first check the injection tests. So let's say this injection test, I want to inject various codes in this and see whether API responds to those injection attacks or not. So the way to do is I will configure my injection test, which means I will simply add some injection codes. Now, I don't remember on top of if anybody has a specific command they want me to inject, you can write in the chat window and I will add it as a use case in this particular case. But for the time being, I'm just going to add some random strings here and see whether API passed these tests or not. So I added this. Another use case is because this API accepts the integer inputs. So another one I'm going to add is a very long integer value, or a very large integer value. So I added these two cases. One is simply the garbage. Another one is very, very long, large integer value. Once I'm done with this, I will say for this particular endpoint, remember, I've already added this API, so I don't have to worry about adding this. So this API is already in my portal against which I want to run this test. And I say, okay, run this test case and show me the report. So right now, I am running these test cases. And as I showed manually, it passed those two test cases, which means API did not respond in a funny way or any other results produced which could indicate, this is being compromised. So this handled quite well. Now, how about the rate limit test? How about if I bombard this API with tens or even hundreds of API calls and see whether this API passed the test or not? So I'm going to run that test as a second use case. So what I'm going to do is, for this particular API, I'm going to run the API rate limit test. Once again, recall API rate limit test is basically to see whether API can handle the payload or not. So in this case, the security module is going to generate multiple API requests and see how the API backend is able to handle this request. So once I do this, I run. So the system is telling me the test has been scheduled, started, but I don't have the result yet because it's gonna see how it is responding over the next minute or two by generating multiple requests. So now I can perhaps come back in a few seconds to see. Okay, so my rate limit test has just completed. As you can see that here, I got the notification. Now let's see what results we found. Well, it failed the test. How do we know it failed the test? Well, of course, what it did is the system generated thousands requests in total, and API responded 36.18 times. This is average, right? Per second. And a typical recommendation is not to this is not a best practice to respond to a single user's call 36 times per second. So there are various guidelines. There is also depending on the business logic that you have, depending on the ecosystem that you need to support, you might have to scale to that level as well. But in this case, there was no reason for them to serve 36 calls per second. So it did fail the test. Now, what about, let's say, sensitive information tests? So if I go back to my results and show what exactly this was responding, or let me see some of the earlier calls. So you can see that this API responds back with certain pieces of information. Let's say I want to set up a use case in which I do not want this API to be responding back or containing email addresses. Okay, so basically, I'm defining email to be my sensitive information. So once again, I'm going to take this tag and perform another test on this particular API, which is called access data tests, which is, API 3 top OWASP top 3 problem. So this is based on 19 version. So there might be some mismatching what 2023 version says and what 2019 version says. But here it is. So once again, I'm going to configure my tests. So right now, I don't have my definition in there. What exactly is sensitive data? What exactly is PI and all that? So if I run this test, it should pass because I'm putting no restrictions on this. So once again, I choose this API, I choose this test and run the test, and there you go. So it did pass. It passed because there was no restriction on this API. But now let me put a restriction on this. What do I want to say? I want to add a use case which says if it contains email, okay, or some of the other tags I can add, then tell me whether this API, has those responses or not. So once again, now I run the same test again. I execute. This time it failed. Okay, and it is telling me that this API is responding back some pieces of information that you identified as sensitive. All right. So in summary, all these test cases that we are running, uh, we want the situation in which we can run this programmatically, perhaps at certain intervals, going back to our use cases. We want to see whether we want to run authentication test, we want to run authorization test, or we want to run all of that. Okay, so I guess when we take a break now, and let me switch my screen to the slides again. So now we will look into how we can do this continuous API monitoring. So the first scenario showed was I did it manually. I entered wrong inputs. I see how it behaved. It behaved well. But then I said, oh, well, we don't want to do this in a manual way. We want to automate this. So, and then I showed, the entire OWASP top 10 suite is there for us to run those test cases and see the results in a more automated way. When we come back, I do not even want to do this manually testing those. I want to set up a plan or a policy in which I want to choose a collection of APIs and a collection of tests and say, go ahead and run these tests every week, every month, or every quarterly, and give me a result or give me a report. Inform me only when those tests are breaking any those results are failing. So when we come back from the break, we'll look into those aspects, and then we'll look into uh, the the role of gateways and look into some more scenarios. So Dave, I think this would be best to take a break now, and then we come back and try to wrap up with a few more use cases.
Sure. You thinking like 10, 15 minutes or?
Yeah, so this is 6:45. I guess we both are in the same time zone. So
Yeah,
probably we can start at 6:55. So that gives everybody 10 minutes break.
sure. Sounds great.
All right.
Hey, Baljeet, as we get ready to kick off again, there are a couple questions. Um, excuse me, Ricky. I tried to answer your question in the chat, but yeah, we'll be pulling a report of who the attendees are, and based on that, we'll be sending out an email with a certificate of participation that anybody can then use to submit for the CPE credits. That'll come out probably in a little bit later this week, but we'll get that out, excuse me, before the end of the week. And then there's where did that go? Francis asked, how did you upload your APIs? That's the first question. And then there's one out from Michael after that.
Okay, great. So let me answer Francis' question first. How to upload API. So let me switch back to okay. So to upload a new API, so you can use this API that I uploaded, or you can upload yours. And the way to do is through a couple of ways. You can either manually add an endpoint. So each API may have multiple endpoints, so you can add a new API. So let's do this. So it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. So let's do this so that we can answer this practically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply re-add this API again in a manual way. So for doing that, I'm going to create a new API and call this ISACA API 2. So I'm just going to call this API 2. Okay, version doesn't really matter. So I can add this under a vendor name. So you can associate any particular category of this API, but because you could be managing APIs of various types, so it's good idea to categorize. That's one of the inventory management problem that OWASP identified. So let's call this, for the sake of completeness, doesn't really matter. We'll just call this Business and Technology API. This could be my home page. This is just a sample test API. Okay, so I add this. Now I also need to add the endpoint details. So here, this was my API. The endpoint detail is this. So I can choose, is it a get call, post call? So this is a get call, so I can do that. Documentation page, this just helps you with referring to this API more in a structured way. This is sample API endpoint. Okay, and then for the time being, I'm just going to skip authentication, but some APIs may require authentication, so you can add those details later. But this API doesn't have any authentication, so I'm just going to skip that part. But I'm going to add a parameter page, as this API has a parameter page. And I'm going to say this is integer. Is it required? Description, sample, parameter. And the placement of this parameter is either query, string, path, or in a header. So you can choose those options here. I'm just going to call this This is a parameter that goes into query string. And that's it. So I'm done. I just added a new endpoint. So I just added this API right now. But obviously, this is just a duplicate of the previous endpoint, right? So just for the sake of demonstration. Then I can simply call this endpoint and, of course, run the same process again. Let's say add 2. And now I have the response of the second endpoint just I added. Okay, so I can see, okay, so this is my responses to API just I added. So hopefully, Francis, that answered your question, how I can quickly add. Another way to add this more programmatically is if you already have an open API definition. For example, some of you may be familiar with Open API standard. So if I already had an Open API standard available or description available, I could simply upload this API for any API. So let me show you that part. For the sake of argument, I am just going to download this API first. Okay, so I'm basically downloading the API definition first. So that would be okay. What do I do? Oh, so I need to first export.
You thought you don't have it built in.
For some reason, my internet got slow. Maybe. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the same API as a Open API standard. So first I'll download this and then I will upload this. So I download this. So this is my definition of this API. I download where it is downloaded. Okay, so just in my download folder. Now what I'll do is I'll upload the same API back, but in real practice, you would already have a open API definition for any API that you want to add available to you, and then you can upload it back, right? So let's say you already have a definition. This is the open API definition, that sample API that I already have, and I will upload it back here. So let's say I do it here. So now I will import and go to my downloads. Okay, so now it detected select an API vendor. So I'm just going to add under ISACA example, attach a category. Let's call this time business technology, and that's it. So what I just did is I uploaded another API under ISACA, which I did not add manually, but I uploaded through to the Swagger file or the Open API file. You can see that I can either add manually or through the upload functionality that is provided there. So same thing here, I can see the details. So this is what I just added. And now I can make call to this API as well. So 3. Okay, so this is the API I just added by upload functionality. This is something I added manually. Okay. This question is not being asked, but let me, this you might need anyway. As you upload your APIs, they start to show up in your security module as well. So once you upload APIs, this is the one I just uploaded right now through the Open API definition, and then I can perform all my tests that I was doing earlier. So hopefully this answered your question in a more comprehensive way. But if there is any follow-up question, then please let me know. Dave, there was another question by another colleague. So what was that?
Yes. Excuse me. Michael had asked for when we get back, can the tool handle regex, or in the TeejLab documentation, do you have any recommendations for pattern matching?
Where is that question? Can I read it again?
Oh yeah, sure. It's in the Q&A.
It's in the Q&A. Okay, I was looking
Yeah,
the
in the
wrong.
Q&A under it's still open.
Okay, and how do I go to Q&A?
Do you see Q&A on the bottom with like the different options?
Okay, when I'm sharing, it doesn't show me that option, but now I can see it. Yes. So the question is for when we get back, can the tool handle regex? Or in the TeejLab documentation, do you have any recommendation for pattern matching? So Michael, I'm assuming this question is in the context of matching the sensitive information test use case I showed. Is this in that context, or is this in the context of the security test inputs? Okay, so Michael is saying yes. So the answer is yes, you can. Sorry, let me rephrase. So the answer is no. You have to provide precise strings that you are looking for, but you cannot provide a regex to match in your API responses. But what you can do is you can provide multiple inputs that you want to sanitize and look into your API responses for sensitive test use case. Does that answer your question, Mike? Okay, all right, awesome. So, Dave, was there any other pending question?
No, that I think it's us current. Thank you. That's awesome.
Okay, so let me share my slide deck again. Okay, so in the spirit of saving some time, I think everybody got the idea of there is a need for us to run these security test cases. And before that, I walked us through why API security is important. Then I talked about what can you do about it. For example, OWASP top 10 tests. Then I showed how you can detect, or what are the indicators that highlight that APIs are under attack. So if you're paying attention to my logs here, I'm also recording these responses. So in a way, I am making all those calls as long as this API calls are going through this portal or the API gateway. I'm recording all the inputs, outputs, who's making these calls and whatnot. So in a way, I have that information captured as well. So we talked about authentication, we talked about authorization, we talked about indicators of attack. We also talked about how to configure, and I showed some examples of how to run tests. What I'm going to talk next is what is the role of API gateways? It may not be possible for us to run all the test cases, but now let me show you what are the important functions that API gateway should perform or they are already performing. So the very first one is traffic management and load balancing. Okay, so you saw that multiple users may initiate requests. Right now, the examples I showed, imagine all those APIs are hosted in the cloud. Those are your APIs, although they are not in this particular case, but imagine they are yours, and various users need to call those APIs, whatever the use cases, they're using those APIs in your application. So you need to manage the traffic coming from the users, but also responses that are going back to the users. So you need to do the load balancing. The other important function is you need to make sure that authentication authorization is intact. So users are controlled. For example, none of you could call those APIs if you are not signed in, right? So you just go to portal, you can't simply call those APIs. Authorization, none of you could run the security tests because you were not authorized to run the security tests. So those were the use cases that we just saw. Request and response transportation. So gateways not only are managing requests, that means API calls being received from the system, from the user to the system, and responding back with the answers that we saw. So it happens both ways. Right now, both things happen in the same portal, your response, your request. But imagine you are able to receive these responses at your end in your application. So we do not necessarily have time to show, but you will be able to invoke all those APIs that I showed in your application. It's just that instead of making calls in the GUI tool that I showed, you're making calls using a code in your application. Then you need logging and monitoring mechanisms. I showed how you're recording responses, how you need to collect different analytics, who's making calls at what time, what are the inputs, what are the outputs. So all that is needed for you to make more informed decision about user intelligence, API usage intelligence, behavior monitoring, and all those parts you need to put together for the purpose of managing your APIs as well as managing your users and continuously monitoring the security posture of your APIs. This part we did not necessarily showed or talked about, but this is a very important part where you need to scale your solutions to larger capabilities. So what does this mean is there are certain gateways that can support caching mechanisms, which means let's say two users gave a same query. In an ideal world, let's say there is no underlying data model, which means the answer changes over a period of time. Same question, same answer. Then it doesn't make sense for the query number two by the user number two to give the same response back by running the query in the backend. Okay, so if gateway knows that this is the same query, this is the exact same answer, then the gateways can cache those answers rather than going back and increasing more load onto the API servers where they're hosted. Gateways themselves can respond back by caching those results that they're receiving. This helps them with performance optimization because the gateways can answer those questions upfront as they receive those requests, and this could be very useful functionality. Now there are various caching mechanisms, geography-based, user-based, industry-based. We are not going to go into detail because this is a topic in itself, a huge topic. We could spend all day about different caching mechanisms, but I think you get the point. The next one was service discovery and management. The discovery capability that I talked about, which is OWASP API top 9 problem that they have highlighted. Now that problem is very interesting yet difficult problem. Let me actually give you a quick idea behind that problem. If you have one API, 10 APIs, 20 APIs, you can still manage them. But what if I tell you if you have hundreds of APIs, thousands of APIs, perhaps millions in the future? So managing them, categorizing them, cataloging them becomes very difficult. So you need mechanisms to discover, search capabilities. And people who attended my first workshop, they also saw discovery from applications. So sometimes you might use a library by downloading from GitHub, integrate in your application, not necessarily knowing there could be some APIs in that. If I remember correctly, a bunch of our colleagues had actually scanned those applications. So let me show you. So these are some of the applications we had scanned in the previous workshop. So why did we do this scan? Because we wanted to see before we use these libraries, what exactly are in these libraries. So that's discovery aspect as well. So here, let's say for this particular library, which was scanned by our colleague Trevor. And you can see that when this was scanned, where it was scanned from. So no private information. This is was scanned from GitHub. We took it from GitHub, and this is what we had found. So this is also one aspect of discovery where in this project we had found a bunch of Google APIs and all that. Okay, so inventory management. Now, discovery may happen multiple ways. Discovery from source code, discovery from networks, discovery from your portal itself. Because if you have hundreds of thousands, then you need mechanisms to search. Okay, show me all the APIs that are under data science. Show me all the API-driven APIs or AI-driven APIs, or show me all logistic APIs. So this way, you are able to categorize your APIs in a more effective way and manage the compliance security risks on top of them more effectively. Rate limiting and quota management, I already talked about. I gave the example, I demonstrated it, that how difficult it is sometimes when you do not have those mechanisms in place, because you could bring your server down by simply calling that API multiple times. This is another part which I'm going to explain through this part here. Certain websites have or your API responses could indicate to the websites which websites should be accessible, or you should the API should have access to. So these CORS policies, or cross origin resource sharing policies, allow us to prevent redirecting certain users or the automated responses to unauthorized domains. So this allows you to prevent from phishing attacks or some sort of a attacks in which you could redirect the users to malicious websites where they could reveal certain identity or other problems. Okay, this is time for our last question. I believe this is our last question. So Tim, the question we want to ask to the audience is, what should be in our checklist? And thank you to our ISACA San Diego chapter colleague, Dave. We were talking about this checklist during our workshop preparation time. And one idea was, a lot of the colleagues on the call may not necessarily be technical. They may be from compliance background, audit background, licensing background, not necessarily from the security background. So without losing the context of security, without losing the technical details, what can we do? How can we help our teams to make sure that if they don't, their technical teams or their security teams can act upon those action items? And that's where we came up with the checklist idea. So the question is that we want to ask to the audience is, what should be on the checklist? If let's say you are conducting an audit, after this workshop, now you're familiar with some of the stuff that you need to worry about, or rather, in a better words, what you should care about and what you can go and ask your teams or CISOs or CIOs what we need to do, put a plan in place to manage our API security risks. So what should be on this checklist? That's the question. So let's give everybody a few more minutes, and I hope people are answering that in the chat window.
Sorry. Some of them are answering it directly in the question thing, and I'll drop those answers in the chat.
Mhm. So that's a good one. Somebody said we should track OWASP top 10. They said OWASP framework, but I see the point. What else? So that's probably one of the lists. What else?
They're coming in faster than I could copy and paste them over.
For some reason, I can't see it, Dave. Are they putting in the Q&A?
Can you see, does the poll quiz window pop up for you?
It did. It did.
Okay, do you see where it says 17 out of 17, 100% answered?
Yeah,
And
correct.
then click view details.
Oh, that I cannot see for some reason.
Yeah, I think you're the only one that has that, Dave.
Oh, okay, well then let me keep copying and pasting.
You know, if you can click details, it should show for you.
Yeah, it opens up in another page. In like another
Yeah,
web page.
that's okay. You can just tell me what are some of the items that they think should be on the checklist.
Oh, I'm pasting them into the chat.
Okay. All
Are
right.
you seeing them in there?
Yeah, I can see it now in the chat. Okay, good. So I think we have good answers. So great. People who recommended what should be in the checklist, let's go through this checklist and see what do we cover. So that's what is on my checklist. So what we need to do is, in order for us to build a comprehensive API security program, and APIs being such an important asset for an organization, there is no excuse not to have a checklist. So you care about applications, APIs are very much like your products that you need to manage now. So the very first thing on the checklist is API discovery and inventory management. So ask this question, do we know all our APIs? Okay, so how do we find out? That is a separate problem in itself. Uh, it's my guess in many organizations, you do not have complete inventory available to you. Okay, so we struggle, and this is true for many organizations. And people are trying to put various controls to get to a good state where you have at least some good handle. So inventory management, this is in many ways is OWASP top 9 problem. But to me, this is the very important checklist. The reason is, if you don't know your APIs, then how can you even imagine managing those risks? Okay, if it does not exist, how can you manage this? So to me, it is top one. That is the very first thing you got to do this. The next piece on my list is, having authentication and access control in place. So once again, do we have process in place or tools in place to make sure that all the APIs are authenticated and all of them are access control? Okay. Next, none of those APIs are hosted through HTTP call. They all must be through HTTPS. Some may say, well, we have these internal APIs and hosting it is not a risk. But again, I would say, you need to protect your data. You need to use at least one layer of encryption, which is embedded in your HTTP secure protocol. The second on checklist is make sure you are rate limiting and throttling your APIs. So this could be user based, this could be IP based. It doesn't really matter what policies you're adopting, but you need to put a rate limit on those APIs. Logging and monitoring. So regardless of you have rate limits, regardless of your detecting those through encryption techniques and you have access control, you need to still monitor and log those API calls in the best possible way, inputs and outputs, responses, who's requesting what also, but you need to log and monitor those results. Continuous API security testing. When I took a break, I wanted to show you a use case where we could put those API tests on weekly schedule, monthly schedule, or whatever frequency we choose to. But that's the idea. We want to ask our engineering team, product team, do we have a plan in place to constantly check the security postures of those APIs? It's not just a one-time assessment. So you need to make sure that we are doing this constantly. API gateways and security controls. So all those controls that I talked about must be as a comprehensive part of your API gateway solution. So do we have a gateway? Maybe or maybe not. Can you host an API without gateway? Of course you can. But again, then you miss all those functionalities that I'm talking about to enforce access control, rate limits and all that. You could still do this, but with gateway, the management becomes much, much easier. API lifecycle and secure development practices. Do you have your blueprint? This is the blueprint. Do you have that? You can plus and minus things from this blueprint, but you need to have a documented lifecycle and development blueprint for your APIs, all the way from design to production to supporting it, sunsetting it. You need to have a blueprint. Last but not the least part, do you have a business continuity plan in place? Well, we live in a world where we know that things could go wrong. So once your APIs go down, what kind of response do you need? So this must be part of your two aspects: responsible disclosure if something goes wrong with your APIs, and also response team that is responsible for responding. But you need to have a business continuity plan. If these APIs go down, how do we continue to operate our business? So I'm not trying to claim this is a complete checklist, but I would say this is a good start. So if you start this, you can add, subtract things from this checklist, but this is a good start, and this is perhaps in many ways minimal you should do. All right, so that brings us to the last part and the fun part of this workshop, take-home exercise. So now I'm going to give homework to everybody. From now until the third workshop, I would like to see some of you, if not all of you, take more deeper dive into this and sharpen your skills, enhance an understanding, and see how do you benefit from these workshops. Because Dave and Tim, they worked hard to bring this workshop to everybody. So we're gonna make sure that everybody benefits from this. Of course, my interest is giving you the exercises that are practical yet easy enough for you to take the next steps, encourages you to make sure that you take the next leap in your journey here. So here is what I want you to do. Go to the portal, API Discovery portal, for which you already created an account, you already have an access. Some of you may not necessarily be ready for the advanced part, which means running those security tests, configuring them. You might need some hand holding, which we are happy to do it. I will share some Learning Hub videos that you can use. But also some smaller tasks that I will demonstrate right now for you to do, which will basically good enough as a first step for you to start exploring. Excuse me. And then perform some analysis that I will show how to do this. So let me show you the task that I want you guys to do. So as I described here, the first step, go to the portal. So I already did that. So I'm in the portal. In the portal, you will see this option, claim an API from the marketplace. So if you go under My Actions, you will see claim new APIs. So if you click there, it will allow you to explore some newer APIs that you may not be familiar with to access those APIs. Okay. And you may end up seeing bunch of these APIs that are purposely added into the platform for you to look what this API, who's the vendor, what is the endpoint, and see if you can run some of those security test cases I will show you. So let's say, by the way, before you take any action, you can look and browse through some of these APIs that are listed here. And let's say I want to investigate. So let's say I want to investigate this Propeller Health API. I don't know what this API does, but I'm just gonna click on this flag. So this flag allows you to start reviewing this API. Okay, so reviewing means before you can run the security test by adding those pieces of information, you have to review this API to basically see whether you have the details available or not. So once you click on the review, it will give you the option to review the vendor. So vendor is basically the company that owns this API. Okay, so these are all publicly available APIs that are there, so which we are adding into this as a community portal so that everybody can see those APIs. So here I click on the review vendor. And in many cases, the system would automatically find some of the details, but it is possible that it may not be able to find some of the details. For example, the system couldn't find uh, what exactly this Propeller Health is. Maybe we can Google this. So indeed, there is Propeller Health, some company. So I can bring this URL here and attach this home information and add some piece of information there. Okay, so some description I can add so that it's easy for me to track and categorize these APIs we are going to investigate throughout the 3-4 workshops. And also I can include the license if it is available somewhere on their portal. I'll talk about this in my third workshop. So this was focused on security. The next workshop is going to be on legal compliance. Since being a medical company, we have to be careful. What are they saying about their publicly available APIs? What should we do? What should we not do? And we have to respect those policies. So oftentimes they have something called privacy policy. So privacy policy, I'm going to bring this back into my this piece of information here, and I'll call this privacy. Okay, and I'm done. So I added those pieces of information, and then I have a some API by this particular vendor, Propeller Health, and then I can. Oh, it is asking me for a vendor detail. Okay, so let's say if I can add. I'm just going to add some logo. Doesn't really matter. Just to save some time, I'm doing this, but you should add a proper logo so that you can recognize that vendor clearly.
I look
But
pretty proper over here.
yeah, this could put me to trouble, but we will see. You know, this is a community education, so we can be excused, we can be forgiven
Yeah.
our mistakes. So now what we are doing is basically just added uh, the category information. So this looks like this is a healthcare related. So I'm just going to attach a correct category, and I'll show you why this is important. So once I review this, look what will happen when I claim this. Once I claim this, this becomes my API that I can investigate for security purposes now, because this comes under my name under my manage my API section. And what does this mean is once this is added here, this is also added under my security test workbench. So here, if you see that, if I type in propeller, so this is here already now. So now I can go ahead and add a bunch of test cases that I wanted to, but I won't run those test cases. I want everybody to take the first step to claim that API, whatever API they want to claim, and then we will investigate together in our next workshop. So that's the homework, folks. So go to the portal, claim an API, and conduct your analysis, which we'll do it together next time. Now here, one thing that I want to highlight here, once you go claim your API that you want to investigate, it is possible that you may end up clicking the review button multiple times on multiple APIs, which means that, let's say if I click this guy, now nobody else can review this. This is assigned to you, okay? Which means that if you don't review this in the next 5 days, you're blocking everybody else from reviewing this. Or the other thing could happen is you could end up clicking too many APIs. So you're clicking on this, you're clicking on this, you're clicking on, let's say this, sorry. And maybe you're clicking on, okay. So now see what happened. The system does not allow you to review more than 5 APIs at one time. And you can see why, because otherwise you're blocking everybody else to look into those APIs if you do not end up actually doing some proactive work. So the system only allows you to concurrently review 5 at a time. Once you hit this limit, then it will not allow you to review other one. So once you complete the review, then you can add one more. So let's say if you, by mistake, you end up doing this, then what you can do is you can cancel your review. Let's say I clicked on that, but I didn't want to review this one. So what I can do is I can cancel this review. I can cancel the review. And then what will happen is this API review will go away from my account and I can then work on the other API that I wanted to review. So just a bunch of things that you might encounter while you explore. So once this is done, so one last piece that I want to share with you is, I know many of you will forget these steps. So that's very natural. So to solve that problem, what you can do is you can go to my resources under Learning Hub. So Learning Hub is where there are a lot of tutorials that you can watch related to how to claim API, how to do security testing, how to do compliance testing, how to run a security test. Bunch of videos are there that could be very, very useful to you. If you forgot how to sign in, there are a bunch of videos explaining you how do you can sign in and do other things. So that brings me to the conclusion part or the summary of this workshop. And here what I want to summarize is today we went through the very first part, looked at why APIs are important for today's digital economy. I gave you the numbers from industry perspective. I gave you the value from economical impact they're making. In many ways, if you forget everything, but don't forget APIs collectively form the 4th largest economy in the world. That's how important they are. They carry 83% and above web traffic. What else you can imagine the importance from these APIs? So they are very, very important for our digital economy. So protecting them inside your organization and just learning about this API economy is a very, very important aspect. And towards the end part, we learned about the security due diligence. What can we do? We learned about OWASP top 10 tests. And we also learned about doing this manually may not be helpful. Right? So of course, for learning perspective, we can do many of these things, but making them intelligent, making them automated is going to be very, very important for our API security programs. Last but not the least, I shared a bunch of resources. We ran some test cases. We saw some fun exercise. I even gave you homework. So I expect that you will be able to do those homework. If you forget, there is a learning hub from where you can go and learn again. So that concludes our workshop. And as I promised, which is the last item here, it's time for Q&A. Back to you, Dave and Tim.
Sure, and we do have a couple questions that have come in while you were going over that last section. First one is in the Q&A from Ibrahim. What is the relevance of DORA with the API breach and business continuity?
What is the relevance of DORA? Okay, let me actually see the question.
Yeah, I'm not totally following that one, but that's not uncommon for me.
I don't see that question. Is it in a Q&A section?
It's in the Q&A section
Q&A.
under open.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I can see that. What is the relevance of DORA with the API breach? So is DORA a name of a specific API, Ibrahim? So we don't know what the, I could guess what this question was about. So
Here, tell you
I
what.
think the
Go ahead.
business, sorry, Dave, you were saying something? Oh,
I was dropping the question. DORA is an EU regulation regarding BC.
Okay, I was actually not aware of that. So I actually do not know. So thank you for sharing that question. I will look into this and see what we can learn and share perhaps later in other workshop.
Yeah, that was a better question than I realized. Then Michael had asked,
Hold on one sec, guys.
Oh, what you got?
I went out on the web, yeah, and it's GitHub documentation, DevOps Research and Assessment, DORA, Key Metrics API.
But somebody's also giving definition of DORA as a Digital Operation Resilience Act.
Ah, true. That makes sense too. It's good to have all these acronyms.
Okay, well, those are good questions. I will definitely do my investigation and see what do we learn from Ibrahim's question and get back maybe through email.
Cool. Yeah, that was a much better question than realized. The other question that we had is from Michael. Do we only use the public filter in the platform? And that question's in the chat. About
good question again, Michael. The answer is yes and no. So some APIs that are already added by us, they were publicly available, but that doesn't mean you cannot add your private API. So if you wish to add your private API and do some investigation, you are welcome to do that. But do be mindful that any API you add, this forum, this community member that who are attending this workshop, they can all see that API. But not the other members. People who are not part of ISACA workshop, they cannot see that API. So if you're okay with that, if that API that is not in the marketplace that we claimed, but you can bring into, you can upload it the way I showed it to you, feel free to do it. But if you want to do it privately, that's also possible. But then you will need permissions from your chapter leaders. So there is a way they can give you privileges by which you can upload those APIs privately, which will be just private to you.
Cool.
So, Michael, hopefully that answered the question, but let us know.
Yeah, he said that was perfect. So cool. Yeah, I just got quiet because I was asking Copilot about Dora, and because no lie, that one's new to me. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you bringing that one up, Ibrahim. Um, do we have any other questions from anybody? We are looking.
If not, could I mention the fact that after the webinar ends, there's a survey, and it'd be very helpful if you guys would fill it out, talking about your favorite parts, least favorite parts, what you liked about this, which will help guide the next class. So it's very helpful because we did use suggestions from the first one to make some changes to this one. So we're learning each time.
Yeah, and if I can build on top of Tim's question, the next workshop that I'm already planning will be more focused on the legal compliance part. And if somebody has any idea what they would like to see in that context, APIs have a huge contractual obligation aspect that poses different kinds of risk and challenges. So that's what I'm preparing in my thought. But I'm very open to the guidance from the chapter, what they would like to see. But of course, it has to be in the sphere of API security and legal risk compliance context.
And Tim, just as marching orders for you and I, outside of this, we do have several people that shot emails our way that you and I will have to follow up with, whether it was just regular questions or there's a couple people requesting elevated permissions, things along those lines. So,
Okay.
but if we don't have any other questions, Baljit, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for everything. I just continue to learn more and more each time. So I'll get my homework done as well.
Thank you.
But, yeah,
Thanks. I'm glad that you liked it and hopefully others did.
yeah, there are some. The platitudes are coming in through the chat. So yeah, uh, at this point, I'm good to let everybody go. Wait, what do we have under? Oh, just even under the Q&A. Yes, thank you so much. Tim, do you have anything else to you want to add in closing?
No, I think we're all set. I've really enjoyed it myself. And as Dave said, it's just like it's a fantastic education. That's all I can say.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for that, Baljit.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave and Tim, for inviting us back. Thank you to all the chapter members who participated and made it useful for all of us. So look forward to the third workshop now. So I'm really encouraged. The type of questions, the engagement, and also the support from both of you is helping everybody reach our mission of sharing knowledge and enhancing cybersecurity practices.
Yeah, no, this is just fantastic across the board. So cool.
Thank you very
Dave, there's
much.
one thing Jennifer asked about essentially CPE instructions. She said CEU, same thing.
Well, what'll be okay? What'll be happening is we're going to run a report of who the attendees are. It'll probably be a couple of days from now, and from that report, we'll send out an email showing a certificate of completion. Then you can take that and go ahead and report it, self-report it through the ISACA portal, where you would attach for other CPEs and credits and stuff like that. But you'll have that email, so you can use this even if you have other certifications from other organizations that you want to submit it on behalf of. Okay, and then yes, we will be a copy of this recording and a copy of the slide deck will be made available on our website. We'll probably get that up by the end of this week as well. So that'll be available for everybody. We've got it from we're doing it with all 4 workshops, and this will be the second one that we get to post up there. And I think that will get us there, unless you saw anything else sneak in, Tim, that I missed.
No.
Awesome. Well, then we'll wish everyone a great evening and rest of your week. And we'll follow up with the CP email. And, oh, here. Dia, excellent question. Hang on one sec. For anybody that wants, here. Do we have here? No. Just load the page. Here's the link. I'll drop it in the chat for the 3rd workshop. You will see description forthcoming because, like Tim said, we're really using these and your feedback and building these out in real time as we go to try and make them as valuable and as relevant for everybody as much as possible. But the 2 links that are in the chat now, the first one is for workshop number 3, and the second one is for workshop number 4.
That's great. So I'll send you the details for workshop number 3, just tentative some ideas. One question, perhaps to the other chapters, I don't know when you guys are meeting next. Have you guys started meeting in person already?
Yes.
Still the activity is online.
No, we for the regular monthly meetings, they're actually hybrid, where we are meeting in person, and but we broadcast them on Zoom as well for anybody that can't make it out.
Okay.
Yeah, and the online is open to the public. We don't require we're not gatekeeping that you be an ISACA member or a local chapter member. We just want to help play it forward, like you said, Baljeet, in support of sharing knowledge, and together we can all be better.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm also open to in-person workshop if it is possible. That'll give me a reason to come down, visit you guys in person. And also, but it has to be sometime when it is little bit more warmer. I guess you guys are always warmer, so sometime in April would be a nice time for an in-person workshop at some point in time.
Okay. Well, outside of these, we're always having the regular meetings on how to make these as best as possible. So you just brought up an agenda item because we're not going to tell you no. We're just going to figure out how to make it happen.
For sure, for sure. The reason is we have done 2 workshops. I think both of them were reasonably well received. So I could see the from the responses and feedback. But I've always found the in-person workshops, the experience is perhaps 5 times better. So I'm open to see if that we can make it happen. My schedule in April is still unknown to me yet, but I'll be very interested either the third or the fourth concluding workshop. We could make it in person to as a concluding grand workshop to conclude this series and plan next.
Okay. No, that sounds great. And Tim, you and I can speak with Marty on that as well to see what options we have.
Well, there might be other options too at that point with that much lead time.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, just a thought. It's not that you have to fulfill my wish. I didn't want to put it that way. I was just saying, is there a better way for us to enhance the experience even better than
Sure.
this? Do we have a chance? So I think I was just being thinking ahead in time, because
love it.
usually,
Yeah.
So I'm open to that, but of course, this is something I depend on your guidance, and if it meets my scheduling criteria.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave, Tim, and the rest of the chapter colleagues, whoever is still there. Really honored to be part of this community. Looking forward to staying in touch, and I'll start preparing for the third workshop.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and helping to be a part of this, and everybody that was asking questions to really help play it forward. We'll start working on that one and figure out how we can finish with a bang as best as possible. I look forward to it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Have a
Thanks,
great
everybody.
day.
Have a great
See ya.
evening.
Bye.